It is 5 o'clock somewhere, and you've tuned into Season 2, Episode 16 of BRC. For those of you who'd like to watch this episode, I highly recommend it. We're live in person on the Emerald Isle. You could view Season 2 on our website, YouTube, Spotify, and starting October 1st on whiskeynetwork.net. I'm Carrie Moynihan, and today, I'll take you on my journey through Roe Co. Irish whiskey. It all started during the pandemic lockdown when I interviewed brand ambassador Josh Cameron. In today's Tales from the Still, I'll play some of the highlights from that interview, which got the Roe Co. distillery on my must-visit list. Then later in the show, I'll take you on my private distillery tour with guide Colin Martin. And finally, I'll speak to head distiller Lora Hemy, who goes in depth about their Creator series. Stay with us. Today's Tales from the Still is brought to you by Barrel Strength Talent. Join founder Leah Niskanen this fall for the Edinburgh Whiskey Academy's first in-person certificate course in sensory appreciation to be held in New York City. These workshops are perfect for spirit industry professionals looking to upskill and whiskey enthusiasts of all levels. Book your seats now at barrelstrengthtalent.com. So we always start off the show asking about our guests' whiskey journey. So when you were a wee little lad, where were you born? Where did you grow up? And how did you end up in this profession?
Okay. So I grew up in Pennsylvania. I was born Western PA, close to Ohio. I grew up doing a lot of stuff in the outdoors. I was always obsessed with cornfields and rivers as a kid, just playing in them. Yeah. So I grew up, I got to farm with my family. That was nice. Just small scale stuff. And I've also always been obsessed with storytelling, movies and, plays and books. So fast forward to New York City. I'm here. Acting originally brought me to New York, and I also songwriting. And then both those things naturally led me into bartending. And when I was a new, terrible, eager bartender, sounds about right. I remember being so nervous as a bartender when I was new, even to stand behind the bar. How do you approach the guests? Those kinds of things. We take them for granted years later, but those first moments behind the bar. I worked at a place in Chelsea, and then after my shift, I would go to a firefighter bar called McManus. And if I had to think about, one of the trajectory points for whiskey for me, I would go there after my shift, and they knew I liked whiskey, and I was starting to become a member of the community, and they would just pour out different whiskeys and talk me through their stories. And that was my first time having great whiskeys, and I think that them giving me that time and that that, hey, we're going to sit down even though you're new, and we're going to talk to you, and we're OGs, and we're going to give you advice and direction. I think that was a really good turning point for me. And then I got involved in the whiskey community. I remember my first trip to Kentucky Still, the first time I ever smelled a rick house, the first time I ever saw the sunrise on a rick house. And those things very much formed me as someone who wants to be a part of this industry as much as I can.
Awesome. So how long ago was that first trip?
That first trip, 2016, or I think it might have been 2017. It wasn't really that long ago. And I got to meet great distillers. I got to hear great stories, and the whiskey community overall has been so good to me. And I've learned from so many people along the way.
So how long ago did you get started with Roe Co. And when did you first hear about the brand?
So I hadn't actually heard of it as a bartender, and I was applying for jobs and trying to see if I'm going to go back during pandemic, back to work as a bartender. And that's what I thought I was going to do. So I found that they were hiring online. And so I had to first taste it. And then I applied, and I got really lucky to have that first interview. But yeah, that was like a 3-month process of interviews, presentations. You start out, okay, cool, here I am. But then 7 interviews later, you're worried and you're saying, oh man, I would love to be a part of this brand. Also, it's the team helped that brought me on. And right away, I knew I wanted to work with them because of how much they care. And that's so ingrained in the whole brand story. So I love that.
Great. Well, I think we should taste this. What do you think?
Oh, might as well. Is this your first time tasting?
Not mine. I've been drinking for 2 days now. 3 days.
Happy to hear it.
And sharing with my roommate,
Even
who
better.
is a big Irish whiskey lover.
I'm happy
She's
to hear
like,
that.
am I going to get some of that? And I said, oh, I guess. Said, but we have to
whiskey
save
you don't want to share,
but
you have to.
Yeah, I said, I just need to save enough for the interview.
Yeah, you can't have an empty bottle. People have a lot of ideas about what Irish whiskey is, what it has been for a long time. And when our master blender, Colin Martin, made this blend, she made 120 different blends. Most of them were very, very good Irish whiskeys, traditionally Irish. This blend is so magic because it does things other Irish whiskeys can't, in that it's more of a sipper. It's more of a cocktail whiskey in that it's higher proof. We use non-chill filtration, and then that time in the bourbon barrels. And then I don't know a lot of Irish whiskeys that have what we have in this non-chill filtration. I think it's probably my favorite part about this particular blend.
Well, I think it's all of it's worth it because this is one of the best blends of any kind of whiskey that I've ever had.
Our distillery, which launched in 2018, very beautiful, right across from Guinness. It's actually in the Guinness powerhouse that was derelict for about 80 years. Now it's totally renovated, state-of-the-art, beautiful distillery. It's so great. One of the funny things about the distillery I always mention is that while it is state-of-the-art, we actually use a wooden wash.
Nice.
And it leaves that ancient funk in there, if you will. And that's something that I think pays homage to our past. Our namesake's a man named George Roe. It turns out, actually, starting with his grandfather, Peter Roe, they ran and operated the largest distillery in the world for about 200 years, from the late 1700s to the early 20th century. So it closes in 1926 because of, a few years before we have Prohibition. We have all those trade wars. We have the rise of Scotch. And Irish tradition was keeping strong to using copper pot stills rather than those column stills over in Scotland.
Well, that and the Civil War in Ireland and so many things.
George Roe and their family, they were fine. They're Victorian socialites in a way. They were, beacons in community. They built actually a tower that still stands right on the property. So it's called St. Patrick's Tower. The top of it is made of copper, so over time it actually oxidized, and that's where we got our verdigris logo here that you see. Our whole brand is inspired by that color. But more so, we put the whole brand into the bottle, which I love. The whole brand story is in the bottles.
Tell us about this bottle. Like, this bottle design, also the fact that it has a leaning tower is fantastic. But I love when I opened up the package and I just saw these beautiful rounded edges and this beautiful embossed logo. This is one of my favorite new bottles. Like, I love the colors. It's very modern, but yet classy at the same time.
So if we start at the top, we have this oak-inspired cork because we are in ex-bourbon barrels, and it has that nice popping sound. Do you guys hear that out there?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, that's the sound of Roe Co opening up and the sign of good times ahead. As you travel down the bottle here, you guys might have noticed our handle.
Yeah.
How it's a barrel, but it's a hogshead barrel. As you know, when the ex-bourbon barrels are shipped over, they're actually rebuilt, and that's called a hogshead. So it makes for a really good handle. You travel down the bottle here, we have the oxidized copper logo, and then further down, you notice that the label is actually off to the side.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so that's on purpose, kind of to represent that Irish history of doing things their own way and in a new way. You notice the pear tree there. You notice the St. Patrick's Tower. So that pear tree, that's our George Washington or our Abe Lincoln story about his grandfather planting that pear tree. But it still flowers to this day, and it's actually the oldest flowering pear tree in Ireland. So, as you guys know, copper stills, they impart those orchard fruit notes that are famously Irish. Whenever you add in the non-chill filtration, which leaves those creamy notes, that oily viscosity that you have on the side of the glass if you actually hold it up there.
Yes, it has great legs.
Yeah, absolutely. Whiskey's tears and poetry, as we say. That actually imparts a flavor of pear. So, a little drum roll here, please. Dun, 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 dun. And on the bottom of the bottle, we have a pear bump.
Oh, pear.
Yeah, just a little.
That's
if you know it, now you know it.
It's a pear.
Yep. So the listeners of this podcast will now know our industry secret.
Awesome. Well, Josh, it has been fantastic having you here on the show today.
Thank you guys so much.
And this is amazing. It's an amazing dram. I'm very excited to be able to share it with the world.
Thank you guys very much. And I can't wait to hear more of your show.
Don't touch that device. The distillery tour is up next. While in Ireland, I made it to the distillery where I met up with Colin Martin, who gave us a private tour of Roe Co. My tour started at the gift shop, where Colin began the story of how the name Roe Co whiskey came to be. In 2017, Roe Co's parent company Diageo chose to resurrect the Roe name in honor of one of the biggest Irish whiskey families of all time. Diageo announced that they would be investing £25 million to establish this new distillery in the old powerhouse building on Thomas Street. Production for the new distillery started in 2019. As we left the gift shop and headed up the stairs, Colin gave us some history of the Roe family. In 1757, Peter Roe purchased a small distillery on Thomas Street in Dublin, which we could see the remaining tower from the stairway window. This purchase began the family's 200-year whiskey journey. By 1832, George Roe had inherited the business, and at its peak, the company was the largest, most productive of any in the country. With an output of 2 million gallons per year, it produced twice as much as Jameson's. Unfortunately, the Thomas Street Distillery, like most others in the early 1900s, were unable to escape the fall of Irish whiskey. When we arrived upstairs, Colin showed us a bird's eye view of the 3 pot stills. From there, we checked out the experience rooms. In the first one, Colin explained how they do their blending sessions, where people get to play around with 3 expressions and make their own old fashions. Then it was on to the flavor workshop. Colin showed us what comes in the flavor kit and how they run the experience. Both experiences were things I would have loved to do had we had more time in the distillery. As sad as I was to not have enough time to tinker with the drams, we did have time for a tasting. Colin brought us down to the bar, where we were surprised to see what looked like an unfinished part of the distillery. But in actuality, it was the old machinery left over from the original power plant that they kept as homage to the building's history. These huge remnants of the past could be seen through the giant glass window at the end of the bar. We tasted at least 6 expressions, including their signature blend, a grain whiskey, a port cask finish, as well as an IPA and a coffee stout finish.
So just make sure not to get them mixed up. But this is grain whiskey. So grain whiskey in Ireland, for the most part, being whiskey that is, in Ireland actually, the technical file means it needs to be produced in a column or continuous still. Scotland, you can actually make grain whiskey in a pot still as long as you don't use a mash bill that makes it anything else. But for us, it needs to be in a column still. It needs to be a maximum of 30% malted or unmalted barley, etc. Usually it's going to be corn based. Can't really grow much corn here in Ireland. We have like a corn belt, but it's not producing a huge amount. So it's like sunny southeast, which is like from Wexford kind of down the coast. We get this kind of weirdly kind of light, bright and warm like microclimate. But most of the corn that's being used for producing Irish whiskey is not coming from there. It's coming from France, amongst other places. Why corn? Loads of sugar. Mm-hmm. Texture as well, but like when you look at the kernel of a corn kernel, you look at sugar content versus malt, just way higher. Loads of starch, smaller endosperm. But basically, what this is a 13-year-old single grain. Mature through column distillation, coming off the still, about 94.6% ABV. Not a huge amount of the inherent flavour of the raw materials, but what you are getting is massive texture and loads of aging potential. So,
and can you explain to the audience that single grain doesn't mean one grain?
It does not mean one grain. It can be a number of grains. In fact, pretty much all grain whiskey will be 2 grains. It's going to have a malted barley component in there for the enzyme action, for the alpha and beta amylase going on. You can pop some oats in there. You can pop some unmalted barley in there if you want. Just a maximum of 30%. You don't want to go higher than that. But predominantly corn. But whenever we see single grain, it just means grain whiskey, meaning column distillation from one place, one distillery. This is the second expression we ever brought out. We brought this out when we opened the distillery, and this is a blend of triple distilled malt whiskey, split evenly between 11-year-old full port cask maturation and 9-year-old bourbon, with a little touch of grain whiskey in there just to make it a blend. And that was essentially to make it a blend, so that people will go, oh, a blend. But this is vast majority malt, half its 11-year-old full port cask maturation. Our second cask strength expression we brought out was just the port cask component. Yeah. It was it's the 2020 cask strength we brought out, which I don't have any of left, was just that port component. And that was again to say, like, this is what we have in our inventory. But that first one was to say, this is what our spirit is when it's unadulterated.
Winner, chicken dinner.
It's amazing, isn't it? And it's definitely one of my favorites. It's so rich and jammy and complex. The influence of having full port cask maturation rather than just like a finish. Now port cask finishes can be amazing. They can be absolutely beautiful. They add this this kind of top layer of beautiful red fruit often, I find. Whereas this is like jammy, rich, heavy.
I can't believe this is a blend.
I know. And you get those notes coming through because they were actually port aging casks as well. So they weren't treated casks. They were actually used for port maturation, which means that they were like dense and, they were just chock full of the port process. They were coming apart. They were so juicy. So the influence of that And then the fact that it was a full maturation, there's just so much depth. Like, red wine drinkers come in, I'm making them drink with that. All right, so next up, we have this guy. So Cask and Keg are a series that we do with Guinness Open Gate Brewery. So across the way, they don't produce all of the Guinness and stuff, but what they have is a pilot plant. So what we do is we give them barrels, they'll age their beer in it, and then we'll mature our whiskey in it. So we'll mature our completed blend, so the malt and grain blend that's spent time in bourbon casks. Different beers, different maturations, different lengths, very different results. The first series that we did was Citra IPA, an Antwerpen Stout cask. So I'm not going to have you taste the Antwerpen Stout cask, because you're going to be tasting another stout-based finish, and because the Citra, for me, is just like amazing. So what happened was essentially the beer turned into a sour beer. So Citra IPA is a very like clean, crisp, Citra hop forward IPA. But what happened was in cask it turned into a sour beer. So it was essentially infected with Brettanomyces. So it turned into this really like. Also, there was definitely some lactobacillus going on. Like it was like big, round, creamy, fruity, like apricots and like stone fruit, really zesty. And that carried through into the whiskey. So the whiskey took on loads of texture from the maturation in the beer casks, but also this, like, for me anyway, this really distinct sherbety note. Like I always think if a whiskey is like something, not like anything you've ever tasted before, that's an amazing whiskey experience. If that difference is also delicious, well, then it's amazing. All it has to be is different for me to be like, ooh. But I think, you'd never think that the ABV was sitting up as high as it is because there's so much texture. It's sitting up at like, what, 55? 56? Yeah, 56.6. But the texture there just wraps itself around, and what it allows the higher ethanol to do is just to make the flavors more kind of more expressive for me anyway. But that was really cool. It was a 2-cask project, just for here, so a distillery exclusive. We were and will again retail it. We're just waiting because we bottle a lot of them are like cask straws, so like people will bottle their stuff in the Cask and Keg expressions over here. So we're just waiting on the bottles to come in. So that is the Citra IPA cask, which this is a really cool one. So there's an orchard in Cork called Killahora. So it's a family-run orchard, and they make some really cool products. What they're probably best known for is they create products that people might associate with different fruits, so notably grapes, and they'll create apple and pear-based products based on those. So one of them is called Pomo. So Pomo is a product they make which is essentially apple port. So late harvest bittersweet apples, fortified with Calvados, and then aged in whiskey casks. We gave them our whiskey casks. They created a Roe Co Pomo, and then we took them back and we put our blend in, and we created a Pomo Roe. So that's the Killahora. So that was Curator's 0.2. So it was part of the same series as that malt heavy port one. And then last, but certainly not least, is our newest expression. So this is our latest iteration from the Cask and Keg project. So the same one as the Citra IPA. And this is matured in coffee stout casks. So again, just the process behind it. So the same cask process as the Citra IPA, but the beer was made in quite a cool way. So they got 3FE, which is a Dublin-based roastery, in to collaborate on it. The Guinness Open Gate Brewery, which is led by Peter Simpson, he got together with your man from 3FE and they made this coffee stout. So they added the coffee grounds into the hot boil part of the process, but they let some of the residuals come through into the fermentation process. Everyone knows how stout's made? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Right. So roast barley, and obviously the roasting of the barley, the way they actually do it. So all of the roasting of the barley for Guinness is actually done on the other side of that building in the roast house. And if you walk around there, it's this really, really distinct smell. They get really, really, really hot. And their apparatus is actually based off coffee roasting apparatus. So, a stout, uses the same technology as coffee roasting, essentially, or at least what coffee roasters were doing at the time when they took the innovation. Then you were looking at this secondary fermentation of the primary fermentation for the beer was going on. You had this kind of secondary cold fermentation going on for the coffee. And for me anyway, it offered like loads of fruit. Like we have a stout finished version of Roe Co. that for me, with no coffee in it, is way more coffee forward. I'm really surprised at the amount of fruit on this. Like, just really kind of glacé cherries, candied orange peel. Definitely has that like mocha coming through for sure. But definitely, and really good for Manhattans as well, actually, based off those. It kind of has a lot of the things that I love about Manhattans in it. So on one of our experiences, like we have a premium experience, it involves like food tasting and stuff, and people get the option to make a Manhattan with this, and it's really
definitely
cool.
has a coffee note.
Yeah.
After tasting through several expressions, Colin concluded our tour by making us a Roe Co. Old Fashioned. Next, I have the privilege of speaking with Roe Co.'s head distiller, Lora Hemy. I have the great Lora Hemy on the show today, and she is from Roe Co. And I've been trying to get this lovely lady on the show for quite some time. We've been to the distillery. We were supposed to meet there, and then schedules got changed, and so here we are. And she is kind enough to meet me here on Zencastr, so we can go ahead and get this interview in the books. What I was telling her just before we got on air was I happened to get this beautiful distillery only bottle of the Creators Series 0.1. It was the second to last bottle, so nobody else can have it but me. So there's that. Lora, welcome.
Thanks for having me. And you totally lucked out with that bottle, so I'm delighted you managed to get one before it sold out.
I said, I tasted it in the bar and I was like, I need that one. He's like, oh, I don't know if we have any more of that. I'm like, oh, go look in the back, something. And he goes, we have two. And I was like, oh, I should probably buy two, except for I still have to carry them home. So I only bought one, but. So,
well,
Lora.
I didn't even have one of them, so you're good.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I do want to talk about this because it says creators and you are the creator. So we'll get to this in a minute. But first, let's talk about your whiskey journey. When you were a wee little lass, did you ever imagine that you would be making whiskey as a living?
Absolutely no, not at all. No, it definitely wasn't my career plan in the slightest. Although I liked reading George's Marvelous Medicine when I was a kid, and all of these stories about making fun things and potions. But no, I never thought about whiskey as a career. It came much later. I had a very different idea for what I wanted to do when I was growing up. I wanted to be an artist. So I went to art school.
You still are kind of an artist.
Yeah, absolutely. It's exactly the same, and that's what I always tell people. I started in a painting department, but that didn't hold my interest for long enough, and I felt my work was naturally becoming three-dimensional. And when I started to discover things like aroma chemicals and sound and all these kind of tangible things that aren't quite physically tangible, that really piqued my interest. And I guess that's where the art meets the science, is that what we work with in the distillery and in the whiskey making process is very much this sort of interface of where chemistry meets physicality and experience. So it ticks off a lot of things that I'm really, really interested in, but it took me a bit of a roundabout way to find it. And not having a chemistry background was a challenge, because it's definitely a challenge to get taken seriously if you come from a background that's different to other people's.
Right.
So it took a pretty much a 10-year journey to get myself, firstly, to serious enthusiast level in terms of tasting and understanding whiskey, and then to take it to the next level and study. So that's what I did. And I went to Heriot Watt in Edinburgh, which at the time was the only place you could study that sort of stuff.
Right.
And then had an interesting time working on a lot of new build projects, new product development at a time where spirits and craft spirits in particular were really taking off in the UK, which is where I grew up. And now I'm in the best job in the world, in Dublin city centre, running a whiskey distillery that I guess I've been here since the start of the project and since we first broke ground on the distillery build. So it's been a fun journey.
Yeah, it's a beautiful facility. I was just in awe that the entire time I was there. I was like, oh, this is gorgeous. I'm like, and I kept telling the cameraman, are you getting this? Are you getting this? It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, I think when you're there every day, you end up taking it for granted, but the building itself is absolutely stunning. And what a privilege to be able to help look after it. I mean, it really is a completely unique building. If you haven't seen it, for anyone that hasn't seen pics, it's a distillery built in an old power station, and it's the old power station for the Guinness Brewery. So
yeah,
very interesting
really cool
design and a very rare Art Deco style building in the centre of Dublin.
It's just fantastic. I love it. So when I first walked in, I went straight into the gift shop, and you know what? I was going to wear my shirt today. I did not think this through when I got up this morning. I bought this great shirt, and I love it. And I'm going to actually wear it I'm going to do a live tasting, a preview show of this. So I'll wear it for that event. But there were so many things. I wanted to buy everything in the shop, and I was like, you have to fly home. Stop trying to buy everything. So
yeah, the shop's dangerous, but it's beautiful. They've done a great job of it.
Yeah, they've got something for everybody. They have every gadget, every item of clothing, everything. And then, of course, the whiskey. The whole wall of whiskey was fantastic. So at the end of our tour, we ended up in the bar and tasted, I think, 6 expressions, including the one that I bought. And all of them were fantastic. And I wanted to know more about this one, the Creator Series, and how did that come about? And were you the main drive behind this expression?
So this was a fun one. We're a blending company first up. So we're trying to do new and interesting things with all of the individual, and I call them flavor components. But we have these interesting blocks of whiskey flavor in our inventory. We're really lucky. We were able to assemble an amazing blending inventory from whiskies from all over Ireland. And then obviously we're adding our own whiskey to that from the distillery too. So we've got a big palette of flavor, and we try and think of new and interesting ways to remix all of these individual components we've got into new whiskies, just like a DJ or a musician would. We're kind of taking that methodology. So the Curator Series was a whiskey that we brought out to celebrate the first production at the distillery. So really, it got released the week of our first mash wash distillations.
Oh, wow.
Which is super exciting. But there were still dust sheets all over the inside of the visitor experience. Very, very early days stuff. But we released this whiskey and a very memorable tasting. We got to bring a small group of whiskey enthusiasts from Dublin into the distillery and taste it with them. But anyway, the whiskey is a different take on our blend, I guess. We have our mainline blend, which is the one that will be readily available in the US, which is a very delicious, I guess, a sort of grain forward blend where we're making the most of the incredible profile and depth that American oak can offer to grain and malt whiskies. And this one was a little bit different. Curators is sort of taking that blending ratio and zipping it around. So we've gone with a very malt heavy profile, and it's a blend by a very slim percentage. I think I can't share the exact percentage in our recipe, but it's a very slim grain whiskey percentage, which is designed to add texture and creaminess to the malt.
Oh,
so it's
creamy.
kind of turning the profile on its head. What I love about that one is that you get the full expression of this amazing parcel of fully port matured whiskies that we had in our inventory, but you also get the delicacy that and the levels of spice that the refill American oak will give from the ex-bourbons that we've used, plus this creaminess from the grain whiskey. So you kind of get the full spectrum of everything plus this massive port infusion in the middle. So you get all the fruit from that. It's delicious.
It is so good. It is so good. I have to wait to open it because I know once I open it, it won't last very long because it was fantastic. So tell me a little bit more about in between Harriet Watt and Roe Co. Where did you go? What did you do? What was your stomping ground before you came over to Dublin?
Yeah, it's a good question. When I joined the industry, there was a big gin boom in the UK. So I had the opportunity to work on a lot of new build gin distillery projects, to help design a few, and to really hone technical distillation skills. And doing that in gin, I think, is actually a really interesting proposition because gin, there is literally nowhere to hide. So you have to fully understand your kit and a huge range of different distillation regimes, methods, technologies in order to get the greatest results. So it's actually a great place to really hone your trade. So I did a bit of that. I had the opportunity to work on a new build distillery project for whiskey, which was also great. And I guess work around the spectrum between builds and MPD and a lot of product development, some of which was quite out there, super creative. I ended up working for a company in the UK where that was experimental. MPD was very much part of their proviso. So I had the opportunity to do a lot of things, which was really, really useful and kind of shaped where I wanted to be creatively. And when I got a call about this project, I really wasn't looking for another job. I was very happy where I was. But again, sort of walking down probably one of the most historic streets in the history of brewing and distilling anywhere in the world, which is where we're based. At one point in time, you would have had the Guinness Brewery on one side of the street and, the original George Roe distillery on the other, both the biggest in the business at the time. And this fascinating symbiotic relationship between breweries and distilleries in this one area of Dublin, which, it's very difficult to say no to being part of that history, and plus an amazing building, an amazing project, and lots of opportunities to be truly creative and really help shape the brand. So and you weren't the only woman that they brought in to head this project, as I recall. So we actually had, and it was actually by circumstance, not design. We ended up having a team of female leaders that ended up working on this project from across the business. So that included some incredible leaders on the brand side. The likes of Tanya Clark, Grania Wafer, and Hayley Milner, our marketing, our global marketing manager. And then the likes of an incredible engineering team, which again was headed by the brilliant Shannon Green from our side. And I had at that time an all-female distilling team as well, which was a very small team, myself and Fiona at the time. And we sort of grew it from there. But again, by circumstance and not by design. And I think that's a really important point to call out, is that
by qualified people, not qualified because they're a man or because they're a woman, just because they're qualified.
Absolutely. And it just goes to underline the breadth of talent in the business and sometimes in less visible roles.
That's awesome. So what is the big thing that's going on now? I mean, you've got this series. How many more of these different numbers are you going to be putting out? And what kind of finishes will they have?
So we have had another one of those come out. Curators 2 was released earlier this year, which was a collaboration by a brilliant with a brilliant independent producer in Ireland, Killahora Orchards, and that was using a pomo cask, which was quite unique at the time. But in terms of next products, we currently have a special release in Ireland. Where we've utilised ex-coffee stout casks, and it's a collaboration with the Open Gate Brewery. Did you get to try it?
Yes, I did. It was really good.
Yeah, cool. I mean, we're really lucky in that our nearest neighbours over the road are not only, a very big, very famous brewery, which we work very closely with, but we have the Open Gate Brewery literally meters from our front door. And for anyone that doesn't know what the OGB do, they are the pilot plants for the Guinness Brewery, and they run all the experimental work, not just for Guinness and innovation, but they also brew a load of really cool beers for their own bar. And what it gives us is the opportunity to work very closely to develop the sort of custom beer profiles that we go on to use for finishing very special releases. And they're small batch. It's a taproom approach to flavour, but we're able to work closely with Peter, the head brewer, and his team to give us what we want in terms of flavour. So it's a really natural fit for us in terms of a working relationship, and allows us to do a lot of cool things. So there's more projects on the way.
That's very awesome. So how long have you been now in Ireland, and do you see yourself staying there for the foreseeable future?
So I arrived in Ireland. I moved into my house about 2 minutes around the corner from the distillery. I live very much in the local community and very much part of it. I can't really see myself moving from this square kilometre of Dublin, let alone any further than that. I'm very much part of the furniture here now, I'm afraid.
Awesome.
Yeah, going on 5 years. So
that's great. So what do you see as your 10-year plan for Roe Co? Like, what do you see as the big future?
So release loads of cool new whiskey. We now have, which is very exciting, we've got our own mature stock from the distillery. That happened earlier this year, and we're adding to that flavour inventory that I was talking about earlier. That's it's our goal to keep adding to that. So we've got a number of very exciting projects planned for the next 6 to 9 months, some of which I can't really talk about in too much detail, but some really exciting projects involving the sort of new flavour components we're going to be distilling that are going to be part of the Irish whiskey of the future. And to keep having fun with it, I think, to ensure if we're having fun in the distillery, we're going to be making fun whiskies, and I think that's the point.
Speaking of fun, what is your favorite part of the distilling process?
I think lots of people would try and second guess me here if they know me, but I'm going to say fermentation. Fermentation for me is where all the fun stuff happens, and this is where we build in the flavour that and the precursors to flavour that we're going to unlock later in the process. When we talk about blending, I think sometimes we don't talk about it as actually starting in the distillery, and that's really what we're doing. When you're making whiskey, you're making a series of decisions over the production process that can change the character of what you're creating or the profile of the spirit, one way or another. And fermentation to me is absolutely critical in developing the things that make whiskey.
That's great.
That would be my favorite part of the process.
It's my favorite smell too. When I walk into a distillery and I can smell all the fermentation going on and the mashes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. It's like oatmeal breakfast. I'm just like, this is great. Well, I just want to thank you so much for being on the show today and taking the time to talk with us. And I'm so glad I was able to take the tour the private tour at your distillery. It's gorgeous. It's wonderful. And I can't wait to see what Roe Co brings out in the future. And why don't you tell us the best way to track things with Roe Co, like your social handles or websites or anything like that we can follow you on?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best place to follow us is our Roe Co Instagram page. And if you want, you can also follow me. I'm Lora Hemy in Spirits. And obviously our website too. But our socials are usually the best place to find us.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lora, for being on the show today. That's
a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. Slàinte.
That does it for today's show. To read notes on this episode or learn more about our guests, please visit barrelroomchronicles.com. Want to interact with the show or have questions for our guests? Then ask them on our socials or send us an email through our website. Or better yet, leave us a voicemail on our website and your recording might be played in our new Speakeasy segment. If you like what you heard, please rate and subscribe to the podcast. If you really liked it and you want to show your support, buy us a whiskey through our Ko-fi site at ko-fi.com/BRC or become an exclusive member of the Barrel Room Parlor, where you'll get exclusive content not seen anywhere else. If you work in the whiskey or spirits industry or just have a deep passion for whiskey and want to share your spirits journey, register to be a guest through our website. Last but not least, please enjoy your spirits responsibly. Thanks for joining me. Until next time, Solanjava.
Barrel Room Chronicles is a production of First Reel Entertainment and is distributed by Spotify for podcasters and is available on Spotify, Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Amazon, and wherever you enjoy your favorite podcasts.